It's time to get your music radio ready with the AudioSkills Podcast. It doesn't matter what type of music you're creating or what gear you use. It's all about the technique. Get ready to turn your home studio into a place where your music goes platinum. Now give it up for your host, Scott Hawksworth.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Scott back with you, bringing you a new episode of the AudioSkills Podcast. We have an excellent show for you today, where we're going to be talking about jobs and careers in music. So many of us like making music, but figuring out how to earn a living in music or even just generating income with it is not easy. And joining me to help discuss this is L.Ariel, who is a singer, songwriter, producer of dance synth pop based in Los Angeles. She herself has a podcast called Hey, How'd You Get That Music Job?, where she talks to pros in the music industry about their careers and interesting jobs that they have. But before we get into all that, it's time for your audio tip of the week. And my tip this week is very simple. Don't be afraid to try new things. You know, the famous Chris Lord-Alge once said, "Nobody's gonna die," when talking about trying new things when mixing. And it's really true. I think here at AudioSkills and elsewhere, sometimes people get so caught up in the quote unquote right way of doing things that it can stifle creativity. If you want to do something crazy with reverb, then just try it. If it sounds good to you, then great job. Are there rules of thumb and best practices when recording and mixing? Yes, absolutely. But don't be afraid to break them or do something way out of left field. You may find that it gets you the exact sound that you want. And that is your audio tip of the week. All right, so now I am so pleased to introduce L.Ariel, singer, songwriter, and producer of dance synth pop based in sunny LA, and host of the Hey, How'd You Get That Music Job podcast. She also runs her site, LArielmusic.com. So when it comes to talking about careers in music, I can't think of a better guest to have. L.Ariel, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Scott. You are so sweet. I love that introduction.
How's sunny LA treating you these days?
Sunny LA is inundated with rain right now. People don't know what to do with themselves.
Well, you know, I can't feel too bad for you because I live in Chicago. So
okay.
We're dealing with snow and stuff and cold weather, though it's nice now.
Yeah, right on.
Well, to start us off, could you just tell us a little bit more about your career in music? You know, what's your story?
Yeah, so I was classically trained and in piano and voice, and I think that was a blessing and a curse, because what happened was it gave me incredible, technique and skill, but it made me so intimidated
to
pursue music that I actually put it on the shelf. I pursued it I was doing music. I went to Indiana University for 1 year with their music program. And then I actually had to leave because I couldn't afford it. I had to go, work full time.
Right. Yeah.
And go back to Boston. That's where I'm originally from. And so I basically said to myself, there's no way I can make a career out of music. I need to be sensible. I need to finish up my college. So I got like a writing degree, and I actually was writing for a mutual fund company. So,
fun.
Yeah, really exciting. Woo! So, and I kind of had, a crisis of sorts when I turned 30 and was like, I can't do this anymore. And I moved to LA, but I moved to LA to be a screenwriter, because I was like, well, that's writing, so I'm still being kind of sensible, but then I get to be creative. And, there's an amount of, incredible writers and screenwriters out here. And
Sure.
I realized that I actually didn't like writing screenplays.
There goes that plan.
Yeah, and I was like taking classes and workshops, and I was like, I really hate this. And I was like, but maybe it just gets better, and maybe I just have to keep working at it. And anyway, so long story short, I really kind of hit a wall, and my story is a bit woo-woo in that I got in a lot of pain, like emotional pain. And, just knew I wanted to be creative, but didn't know how. And finally, it was like this moment of truth where I was like, I really want to do music. I really, really want to do music. And it's too painful not to. That's what it got to that point. It was too painful to not create in music. And I was like, well, how do I do this? Because again, all I know how to do is like, play classical music, and I don't want to play classical music. So I enrolled in the Songwriting School of Los Angeles.
Okay. Yeah.
And that kind of set me off on my trajectory. And I learned Logic Pro, which was another huge, shift for me, that I could actually write and produce my own tracks. Like I could have total control and, pick whatever virtual instrument that I wanted to. And thankfully, I had the singing chops, at least somewhat, so I could do my own singing. So I was like, shit, this is amazing. I can actually like sing, I can write, I can produce, I can be a one-stop shop, and I really loved doing, I loved the arpeggiator, and I loved, making really complex chords. So again, it was like, oh, this is great. I can totally create this in Logic Pro. And I was like, I don't know what this sound is. And then people were like, oh, you're kind of like, you're synthy. You're like a pop version of synth. And I was like, right on, synth pop. So that's kind of how I fell into this, basically my music genre. And then I just released an EP last year, my first EP, so called Pick Me. So that felt really good to finally, after years of doing the songwriting school and just working to produce this EP. I was really proud of it.
That's awesome. And it's so great to hear about, how the different stories of everybody and how you kind of ended up finally pursuing music and pursuing your passion, because that's what it's all about. And it's a story that I think is so familiar to so many of our listeners, that, they have this passion and they want to be creative and they just don't know how. So that's why AudioSkills is here.
Right on. Yeah.
But today we want to talk about music jobs and like the career side of it, because the fact is you got to put food on the table.
Yeah.
And, you actually have a podcast that is called, Hey, How'd You Get That Music Job? So before we go further, can you just tell us a little bit about it? How'd that kind of start and what's it all about?
So again, I, being in Los Angeles, you're sort of at ground zero in a way for the music industry, but at the same time, it can be really difficult to, kind of see the ins and outs of it, and to, kind of see how the sausage is made. Like, how do you get into the music industry, and what is this all about? And I think that there's so much noise, especially, with the interwebs. Like, there's so much noise and so much information that it just can be really overwhelming. And, I was grateful to attend some workshops with interviews with people from the music industry. And then at the songwriting school, there was a few great courses offered there by Galen Whitmore, who's worked for Neo and, all these artists. So he was having, guests come in and interviewing them about the music industry. And I was like, this is so great. And I was like, well, why don't I do the same thing? I know Logic Pro, so I know how to record audio. And again, it was sort of that thing where I was like, holy shit, I can do this myself. Like, I don't have to outsource it. I can create a podcast all by myself. I went on YouTube and looked up how to do a podcast, and basically, just started outreaching to, friends and colleagues I had met in the school and just around Los Angeles. And it's just kind of taken off from there. So
that's awesome. And so many people, I think, want to share their knowledge and share their experience and help people. So it's really cool too that it's such a focused podcast in terms of, music jobs, because I think there's a lot of great podcasts out there, but this is the first I had come across that is focusing on that specific part of music. And, the truth is, so many people are passionate about their music and they want to make a living with it, or they at the very least want to earn some money. Do you have any tips or advice for folks who, they're working in home studios, maybe like yourself, they're learning Logic, they're making music, whatever they're doing. And what are some of the ways they can make money with their music or the skills that they're developing?
I think actually right now, and this is also, again, I'm no expert, but just from, the interviews I've done and research, et cetera, I do actually think, and I'm sure you've heard this yourself, is like, this is actually probably the best time to pursue a career in music, just because independent artists, DIY artists can really kind of take the reins of their career and create their own fan base and really get be their own promoter, their own marketer, their own hustler, and really get their brand out there. So I think that with the good old World Wide Web, I just think is a huge asset. And I think that, again, if you can kind of have that singular focus, especially if you are someone who's like in your bedroom and you're not, say you're not like out at the clubs in New York or LA and like hustling and networking like crazy, I think, using, YouTube and Twitter, and platforms like that to really promote your brand, is just such an incredible resource. And you can really start to monetize and, make a living on that. And I'm happy to expand on that, but I would just throw that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really great point in terms of, it used to be that the labels controlled everything, and they certainly do still control a heck of a lot, but there is so much power now in the hands of individuals for creating their music and getting it out there. It used to be that the only way you could get it out there was through a label, but that's just not the case these days. So yeah, I think that's a really great point. I'm curious, what are some of the more interesting music jobs out there that you've either learned about from your podcast or just seen? Anything that might surprise some people who maybe want to work in music and they're like, well, I never thought that was a job.
That's a really, really good question. And you know what? It's funny because, and this would kind of dovetail also into being a DIY musician, but I'm amazed, and I'm also heartened by how much marketing and marketers are involved in the music industry, and that is actually a big part of sort of today's industry. One of the first people I interviewed, Marvin Siakuna, he described himself as an experiential marketer, and he worked on he started his career like Roger Corman movies, like the B movies, but basically how to market them. And he came up with the show on Bravo, Platinum Hits, which was a reality show competition for songwriters. And he pitched it and he got it and he was executive producer. And so again, like that was, he was such a great person to kick off my podcast because again, he wasn't sort of your like musician that got a hit song and is making royalties. It was like he was like, I'm an experiential marketer and I'm all about telling a story. And he's currently managing his wife's. She's an incredibly talented singer-songwriter. He's managing her career. So, and again, he's doing it in a very experiential marketing kind of way, and he's basically trying to see opportunities and audiences that are underserved. That would love her music, appreciate her music, and really connect with her story. So I think, again, I don't know if that quite answers your question because I know it's not. It might seem a little like, wait, what? But like I said, it really surprised me at first, like how much marketing and marketers were involved, and was such a big part and contribution to the industry. But again, like once you start to kind of dig deeper, and it's like, oh, of course, this makes total sense, and incorporating marketing and marketers into, I think your music business, your outreach is essential. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really good point because so many people, they see the artist and they see, the albums or whatever. And so that's what's the most obvious. Like, okay, well, here's how you get a career in music. You are an artist and you write songs and they get popular and that's that. But there are the music industry, especially, as we were talking about before, how different it is and how it's kind of Wild West when it comes to, online and things like that. So if you want to work in music and you can bring something to the table and you can help artists, market themselves and reach new audiences and all these kinds of things, well, boom, right there, you've got yourself a stew. Like you can do that, So, yeah, and I think it is surprising because I think sometimes people think of the music industry. There's like, okay, there's the artist and then there's the stuffy suits, you just think of these like soulless people sitting in a boardroom, but it's like, no, it's not just that, of course there's going to be that side of it, but you can absolutely be that kind of experiential marketer and really find some success and really make that a job and a career. So
yeah, absolutely. Well said.
Thank you. So, okay. And we've already kind of danced around this, but I wanted to kind of really drive it home because not everybody that's listening to this podcast is living in New York or LA. And, some people are in small towns or whatever, maybe not a music mecca, and they want to make music and they want to work in music and they feel like, well, I can't do it because I'm not in LA or New York. And I assume that you think that's a false belief. And I'm curious, like, what advice might you have, maybe to dive a little deeper in terms of like online or whatever, who maybe isn't in an international city or something to find work in or around music?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, these are such good questions, and they've definitely sort of crossed my mind. And I pose these same questions to my guests on my show because I do think that we're in a different kind of economy now and different landscape. And again, I think it makes it much more of a level playing field. It still takes a lot of work, but this whole idea, the shift that I'm hearing basically is this idea of a sharing economy and more of what's the word? Like serving your audience, but also trying to, again, get to markets that are underserved.
Right.
So what I mean by that is, and you were mentioning Graham Cochran, like he's a great example. He started his business and his YouTube channel, and which is now exploded. But his whole thing was like, my friends want to record. And they want to record in their bedroom and they don't have thousands of dollars to shell out and they don't think they have the knowledge or the know-how to do it. How can I serve them? How can I teach them? And he said when he started making his videos, he would think like, how would I tell my friends about this? Like, how would I tell them how to use Pro Tools? You know? And so this idea of, again, like being of service, of teaching as opposed to, I have this song and I really, really, really want people to listen to it. Is there a way that your song or your work or how you do your work, your technique, your experience, your skill set, that you can actually share with people and get an audience that way? And another amazing YouTube star that I interviewed is Curtis King. And he's worked with Kendrick Lamar and Ab-Soul and all these amazing artists. And his whole thing was like, his channel is all about helping producers and beats makers and sharing that knowledge. And he said, when I was out in the business, like, the elder statesmen, he's like, they were kind of possessive with the knowledge and they were like, no, man, you got to figure it out. Like, tough luck. Like, and he was like, I want to serve. I want to share this information. And as a result, his business of licensing beats went through the roof. And it was the same with Graham's business. His business, totally went through the roof as he put out more and more free material, free tutorials. He got customers. And I think that's the thing that people, because again, it seems so like oxymoronic. Like, how can you possibly give away all this free stuff and you're actually getting customers? But again, it's like you're creating relationships, you're being of service, you're serving an audience, and they in turn will be loyal to you and want to support you in return. And it just seems like time and time again, that's proven.
I love that. And, to even connect it to what we were talking about with like marketing and things like that, if you're an artist and you've had some success and you've built, a bit of a following on Spotify or whatever, maybe think about other ways you could kind of share how you did that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, fire up a YouTube channel and be like, hey, here's what I did. Here's how I connected with this group and all this kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, that's the kind of stuff that will not only help the community itself, but then can also really help you because people see that and they're like, oh, and I like your music and I want to learn more from you. And next thing you know, you've got you're on your way for sure.
Yep, absolutely.
So when it comes to trying to build a career in music or have a job in music and be successful, what's the biggest mistake or maybe mistakes you've either seen people make or you've made personally or you've had one of your guests tell you about, and how can that mistake be avoided?
I've made so many mistakes. So, I would say, well, there's a few things I would say to this. And I think people kind of know this, but I was amazed when I was starting out, how many people it's just, there's a lot of shady dudes out there, or shady people, men and women.
Sure.
But I was astonished. I was like, I am a broke ass musician. Like, I should be the last person you should be coming after. But I was shocked at how many like pay to play, pay to promote, I'll, help you get more followers. I'll help you get this song on this online radio station you've never heard of, et cetera, et cetera. And I thankfully, did the background. There was one gig, unfortunately, I did shell out like all this money for, and it was ridiculous. It was just such it was a club in Hollywood, but there was like nobody there. It was a joke. And, lesson learned. It was like $150 later, lesson learned. And, you don't have to do that. You absolutely don't have to do that. And again, I'm not slamming anybody in particular. Everybody has their own path. And some people may have had success in that, but I'll tell you, like, I got a gig at the Viper Room and it was because of a relationship I built with the promoter. It wasn't a pay to play. It wasn't, and I think so that's one thing that, a mistake that I made, that thinking that I wasn't good enough, that I had to pay to play, or that I didn't have the knowledge, to promote myself, that type of thing. And then I think the other thing I would recommend is, and I don't know if it's a mistake per se, but, this idea, especially when I don't know if this is like in LA or everywhere, but there seems to be like this kind of tunnel vision that people get. Like there's only one way to get success and everybody goes this way, like straight line, like put out my stuff and then, promote on social media and pray that it gets picked up and send it here, send it there. And, et cetera, this straight line. And what I've learned is, again, when I was talking about the experiential marketer, Marvin Acuna, this idea of looking at markets that are underserved. There's a great book called Blue Ocean Strategy, and I can't think of the author. Unfortunately, my mind's gone blank. But it's a book about, they call it red ocean, when the market that you're trying to get into is so saturated. There's just it's like you're competing with thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And this book is about looking for a blue ocean strategy, looking for ocean, waters that have not been served. And they give a great example about Cirque du Soleil. Barnum and Bailey was like the circus, and it was kids and it was animals and it was like cotton candy and ringleader and, and there was no other business that could possibly tap into that market. It was like Barnum and Bailey had been around for hundreds of years. Nobody's going to touch it. And then Cirque du Soleil comes along and they're like, no animals, this is going to be adult focused, circus for adults. It's going to be focused on acrobats and, the styles and the skill. And we're going to have these big tents that just appear out of nowhere and white. It's all white. There's no color. It's just white, beautiful. And they exploded because, again, they went to a market that hadn't been touched, that hadn't been served. And they completely tapped into that, and that underserved, under approached market responded. And so I think that's something that, again, if you can take what you're working on, what you're working on in the studio, and instead of saying like, I'm going to send it to these 5 blogs and these 5 radio stations and this, Spotify playlist or whatever, and instead say, my music's about mental health. I wonder if I can actually like pitch this to a mental health, nonprofit association to play it on one of their videos, about their outreach, if they would use my music as the soundtrack, that type of thing. So that's things I would share.
I totally agree with that. And by the way, I actually looked it up while you were talking. It's Blue Ocean Strategy is written by W. Chan Kim and Renee Mauborg. I'm probably butchering that last name.
That sounds good
to me. Look it up, Blue Ocean Strategy. But I love that concept of the way I might describe it is like looking at a problem like sideways. So the idea of, so many people, you were saying that they get tunnel vision and they're like, okay, this is the only way you can grow a following or sell your music or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it's like, but what you were saying with like the mental health thing, like that is such a great type of way of showing how you're looking at it sideways. You're like, okay, this is the subject of my music. How can I find people who might connect with it most? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's absolutely huge. And that's how you break through the noise, because it's kind of like a double-edged sword, because it's, as we've covered, it's so powerful now. Like anyone can learn Logic and get their music out there and get it on Spotify and all that good stuff. But then there's just so much noise, so much more noise because of it. So it's like, well, how do you stand out from the crowd? And one of the ways is like you were just saying, that blue ocean, that thinking about it sideways.
Yeah, exactly. And another example I would get actually is, Marvin Acuna. His wife actually has, and I feel so terrible because I can't think, but she basically has a respiratory condition. Unfortunately, I cannot think of exactly what it is, but she basically has to have an oxygen tank with her at all times. And one of her songs is called Breathe. And it's just this incredible moving song about just breathing, because for her, it's like, we don't think about it, but she has to think about breathing. And so they pitched this song to a pharmaceutical company that was producing medication that could actually help this condition. And they pitched the song to use in their commercial materials, et cetera. And they ended up, it was like a Jay-Z move. They basically ended up giving her CD, like 1 million of her CDs out with prescriptions, like something crazy like that. I may be screwing up the story, but it was, again, this completely blue ocean, amazing, like out of left field strategy. But they basically boom, 1 million CDs out the door, because again, they were like, how can we, and again, they wanted to connect with people that had a similar condition as hers, and would help them hearing this song. It's very empowering. It's very inspiring. You know what I mean? So again, it was just a great story and a really clever way to market yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and we've actually been talking about this. We're talking about connecting with people. And, when it comes to building a following, being able to connect with those people and be authentic is so important. Yet, it's hard to do that for some people without seeming disingenuous or just awkward or fake. I know we've got, a bit of a following on YouTube and things like that. I know when I was starting out, it was just hard to be okay, wait, hey everybody, what's up? I'm totally not weird, And I'm curious, do you have any advice for people who want to show authenticity with their music or with, their brand, and they're trying to build that following and reach people and be real and come through and shine through?
Yeah, there's different schools of thought on that. I love Twitter. Twitter to me is one of my most favorite platforms because you can literally reach anyone in the world. And one of the things that I did, and some people might be like, oh God, this is so tedious. But when someone would follow me, I would go to their page, I'd go to their Twitter profile page, check them out. I'd go, if they were a musician, I'd go to their SoundCloud, I'd listen to the track, and then I would comment. I'd be like, hey, you know what? This is pretty good. And if it wasn't, I'd be like, hey, have a great day. But it was,
thanks for coming out.
Right on, but it was I wanted to, again, so it was check and see if they were legit, check them out, take the time to look at their work and then make that connection and be like, hey, I liked your video. I liked your song. And sometimes, people wouldn't respond. Sometimes they would, we'd start a conversation. And again, like actually some of these interactions have led to collaborations. So like I'm putting out an EP, hopefully if I get my shit together in the next month or so. And it's with a producer, Justin Marlowe, who's Sound Control is his moniker. I met him on Twitter. And we just started a relationship on Twitter. We've never met in person, but you know, we've worked together now on this EP, and he's a brilliant producer, musician, and again, this is somebody I never ever would have possibly crossed paths with in LA. So I'm a big proponent of that, of really utilizing Twitter. Some people use Facebook, some people use Instagram. Twitter just happens to be one of my favorites. Some people use YouTube too. But again, I think it's that initiating, really trying to make a connection and thinking of how would you want somebody to approach me? Because we all can smell a faker a mile away when somebody's like, hey, how you doing? Could you listen to my da-da-da? And you're like, why? Why should I listen to your shit? Like you just want, or, you know, hey, please follow me. And it's like, all right. And this is the thing that kills me. This is like my pet peeve is like when somebody follows you and then as soon as you follow them back, they unfollow you because they want to look like they have a ton of followers. No number. And I'm like, oh, it makes me so crazy because I'm like, you're such a faker. But, but, you know, there are real people and there's real people behind those profiles. And again, it's about how can I establish relationships? And Scott, I'm sure you can relate to this too with just doing your podcast. Like, it's a great way, again, that you can be of service and network and start relationships with people that, again, it's like you're not being really pushy or demanding. And it's like, they're going to check out your stuff. Like 99% of the time, they're going to go and look at your stuff, look at your music. And it takes time. It's like, there's no magic formula. There's no instant gratification. You know, anybody who's like bought followers, like it like falls apart pretty quickly. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, absolutely. You know, congrats. You have 10,000 followers who may not be real people.
Right. Yep.
Like, yeah, absolutely. And I think you make such a good point because you are your most authentic. Think about your life. When are people their most authentic? When you're sitting there and you're talking to somebody and you've met them and you met them at a party, you have a beer in your hand, whatever. And so recreating that online is just another medium for that. So whether it's a follow on Twitter and just a little comment, that is how you kind of start those relationships. And that can help you not only build your career, but also find fans, you know, respond to your fans, things like that.
Yep.
I think I see so many people, you know, we run Facebook ads from time to time. And one of the things that just is such a pet peeve for me is people will comment on one of our ads. They'll just like throw their song on there. Like, hey, listen to this. I'm like, of course I delete it because what? Right. I'm paying for this ad space, not you, you know, but also it's like, so what is your hope there that someone randomly clicks it and then hears this and it's like, oh, this is amazing. There's no real connection there. You know, you're just kind of shouting into the void and that's just more noise.
Yeah.
You know, what we're talking about is breaking through the noise, and how you do that is like what you were talking about. It's like, hey, follow someone, take a time to listen to their music for a couple minutes, you know, and then give a comment, you know, give some feedback. And then you will never know what can happen from that. You know, that could be the thing that takes your career to the next level, that connection you made. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is that it's a global audience. So again, you know, blue ocean strategy, like where can I connect with people that I'm not trying to connect with Pharrell. I mean, I would love to connect with Pharrell.
Yeah, that'd be great.
You know, but
give me his number when you get it.
Right, totally. But it like, can I find an up and coming producer, maybe out of London, maybe out of Germany, you know, someone who is incredible. I mean, there's so much incredible talent. And again, how cool is it? And I've done that as well. Like literally been able to, I think like Alessia Cara was somebody it was just like one tweet. She was like, hey, hi, sure. Thanks. But I was like, I heard her like when no one knew, you know, before the Grammys, before like she had her music on the radio, I heard her because I was listening to BBC radio and listening to sort of European, again, like off the beaten path music, and really liked her stuff, and just reached out to her and, just got a nice direct response, like, thanks so much. And, et cetera, et cetera. And, no, it didn't evolve into this incredible relationship and I'm producing a song for her right now. But again, it's that idea of, don't just look at the same route, the pop stars that are getting completely inundated and overwhelmed. Like, look for those people that off the beaten path. It's going to take some, legwork. It's going to take some research, but again, taking the time to really, look around. Who's somebody that is more approachable that I can maybe even pitch my song to eventually, but at least try to establish a connection with.
I think that's what it's all about. I think that's such a great piece of advice. I've got one more question for you here. The music industry is always changing. Friggin' 15 years ago, Spotify and YouTube were not even a thing. So I'm curious, where do you see the future of the career or job side of the music scene? Are there any up and coming jobs or roles that maybe people haven't considered before, or anything that kind of you've come across that you think this might be a thing in a couple of years?
That is God, these questions are so good. Obviously, like, interwebs, and I think the whole rise of apps is also huge. And I don't know where that, some people really bemoan that. They just think that sort of the apps are just sort of like crazy content monsters, and they're just sort of devouring content, and it's in exchange for actual quality. But sure. I think Musically is actually one of my favorite apps, and that's a lip syncing app, and that has a huge. Are you familiar with that one, Scott?
Yeah, I have seen that one before. I've seen like some videos on like YouTube of clips from Musically. Yeah, I think
that's actually a huge universe in and of itself of people that they're really it's incredible what people can do with their iPhone and like doing these 15-second clips. But there's a whole universe. There's people actually making money on this app. There's comedians. There's dancers. There's all this. Again, it's like a market that didn't exist a couple of years ago. And people, again, because Lively is connected with them, so people do live streaming shows, quote unquote, either music or dance or comedy or whatever. So again, I think this idea of it's really becoming a level playing field. There is obviously still, the hierarchy in music and the pop stars and with millions and millions of dollars behind them. And that could very well be your future. But I think it's also important to think about being the entrepreneur, about, looking at like Chance the Rapper versus, Beyonce, like looking at artists that again have kind of taken their destiny into their own hands and were like, I can be my own marketer. I can be my own promoter. I can be my own brand. I can be my own, designer, et cetera, et cetera. And again, looking at, other platforms perhaps that aren't so saturated. That's another thing. Like, like Musically, or keep an eye out on what apps are coming out and maybe how you can, maybe be one of the first stars of that particular platform. Because, we all know with tech, like apps are coming out every other day. Oh, yeah. But just like, just checking out like wired.com and seeing, what's coming down the pike. And is that something that maybe I could tap into and again, be one of the first people on that platform and start getting a following that way. Again, a market that's underserved.
Absolutely. I think that is such a great piece of advice there because, yes, it's still very possible to build that huge following on Spotify or SoundCloud or what have you. But even thinking, again, kind of approaching it in that blue ocean mindset of, oh, hey, here's this new app that's got, it's got some users and it seems cool. Can I use this to reach my fans in a new way or get my music out there in a new way? Why not try something like that? And, I'm so glad you mentioned Chance the Rapper, not only because I'm a Chicagoan, but I think that is just a great, great story because that right there, he started, he just basically built his following because he was in Chicago, and, his school, and like he had a local community following. And then he started, translating that to SoundCloud. And then all of a sudden that following started growing, and boom, next thing you know, he's at the Grammys. And I think that's the key. There's this book called 1,000 True Fans that a lot of people talk about. And it's the idea of, if you can get to 1,000 like fans that will go into battle for you, as it were, and will buy your music and will go to your shows, then you can make a living off of that, and you can really be in a good spot. And so I think taking that kind of approach, that kind of idea, and really applying it to what you're doing. So don't just try to get the attention of Beyonce, because good luck, but focus on, okay, what's my community? What things are going on around me? Who in my community can I connect with? And then what other tools can I use to reach out to the wider world, but find smaller communities, like, people with mental health issues and challenges. If your music is for that, there's a community online, and there's a local community around that, and you can build that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And also too, I think Reddit is great, and Facebook groups are great as well, in terms of, say you're really I'm really into the 80s. So, that's something, that's something that I, definitely like to kind of tap into. And again, that can be like a whole other possible community that I may, be able to serve. So.
Love it. L.Ariel, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I thought we really covered some great stuff.
Thank you, Scott. I really loved chatting with you, and you had such amazing questions. I'm so impressed.
Yes. And, as a reminder to all the listeners, do check out LArielmusic.com, and do give her podcast a listen. Hey, how'd you get that music job? It's really interesting, and she talks to a lot of great professionals who know a heck of a lot about this kind of stuff. So it's really awesome. And thank you all so much for listening today. And as a reminder, for links and information about today's show and our guest, please check out our show notes at audioskills.com/podcast. No matter where you are, no matter what kind of music you're creating, just go out there and make it great.
Ready to go even deeper with your recording, mixing, and music production? We've got all the info and techniques you need in one place, so you can turn it up. Go to audioskills.com and access a huge library of video tutorials and private workshops, so you make progress even faster. Come back next week for a brand new episode of the Audio Skills Podcast.